So the big C, and what I mean when I say that is vitamin C. Oh, I forgot that I have this. So this is the structure of ascorbic acid. Many of you may not be familiar with it being presented this way. You probably take it as a supplement, or you know that you can find it in your food. It's a popular antioxidant. It does many things throughout your body, like produce collagen. It helps in the production of neurotransmitters and things like vitamin E. It does many wonderful things. But one of the things that it's not known for, or lesser known for, is as a potential cancer therapy for cancer patients. Hence my question, could intravenously administered high-dose ascorbic acid, another name for vitamin C, serve as a future cancer therapy for pancreatic adenocarcinoma? And we're going to find out whether that's possible today. So I did want to make a quick distinction before I got started. Current research on vitamin C using it for cancer therapy can go two ways. It can be as supportive care for cancer patients or as an actual cancer therapy. So when I say supportive care, I mean that when someone has cancer, they might be given vitamin C through an IV in amounts just to supplement what they're losing from the cancer or from the chemotherapy. And this has been shown to reduce the symptoms and to improve the quality of life. It's not at all curing the cancer or fighting the cancer. This is just to supplement what they're losing from what they're going through. And this is distinctly different from using vitamin C as a cancer therapy, where it might either be, you might be studying it as having its own cytotoxic effects, or maybe seeing how it affects another chemotherapeutic drug and seeing if it boosts its ability to work on the body. So these are two very different things, and I'll talk to you guys about what distinguishes these two. If I give someone IV vitamin C, how is that different from giving them IV vitamin C in this case? So why haven't we talked about vitamin C as a potential cancer therapy before? I mean, it's 2019 and we're already doing so many things with science. Well, unfortunately, there was a really big controversy in the 1970s and the 90s where a man named Ewan Cameron, he took William J. McCormick's idea to see if vitamin C could be used against cancer therapy, and he ran some uncontrolled trials. So he gave patients 10 grams of vitamin C per the IV for 10 days, and then followed that up with 10 grams of vitamin C as an oral supplement. And he said that it reduced the symptoms, it reduced cancer growth, there was like tumor regression, all of these things. So everyone was really excited about it, so Mayo Clinic went ahead and redid the trials, but they actually used controls for this. And repeating the experiments, they did not get any of the results that he stated were possible. And that's when people, including the National Cancer Institute, determined that this might not be a viable choice as a cancer therapy. So it wouldn't be a while until further research was done to determine this is actually a viable course to take science into. So the big question here is, if it didn't work then, why does it work now? Well, it has a lot to do with something called pharmacokinetics. And basically that just means like how the drug moves throughout your body. So as you know, when you're given a drug, the dosage and the way that it's given to you matters. It'll affect the way that the drug is able to work in your body. So in terms of vitamin C, when the first trials that didn't go so well were done, they didn't use as much vitamin C as they should have. So they didn't take into account what vitamin C does in your body through IV, determined as a determinant of how much you give the patient. And then they didn't take into account that when you're giving the vitamin C orally to a patient, there's a lot of stuff that goes on to in your body so that you don't have an accumulation of vitamin C. So you basically just urinate it out of your system. So it never gets to a dosage where it can actually do something about the tumor or the cancer. So further research determined that 1.7 millimolar was selectively cytotoxic against 4 tumor cells lines in vitro, and that means like inside of a living being. So that's the amount that you need to reach, whether that's intravenously or orally, in order for it to have a cytotoxic effect on the tumor. Unfortunately, it won't reach this amount in an oral intake form. So you have to give it in a parenteral administration, and that just means not orally, in order for pharmacological vitamin C concentrations to produce a drug-like response and not a vitamin response. So this is actually a really important distinction before we move into the specific anti-cancer properties of vitamin C. it has been found that the proliferative effects, which just means how the cancer cells divide, are clearly dependent on the ascorbate concentrations. So when physiological and sub-physiological ascorbate concentrations are given, this stimulates proliferation, which is something that you don't want. You don't want the cancer cells to continue growing. You don't want to help them out. But when pharmacological ascorbate concentrations are given, again in the millimolar range, it exerts anti-proliferative effects. So that will determine how successful the trials are. So that's why I wanted to preface it first. So I'm going to give you guys like an overview of the current research on like a variety of different cancer cell lines before I talk about specifically pancreatic adenocarcinoma research, because obviously these results were applied when doing the research for specifically pancreatic adenocarcinoma. So you will see key overlapping results. So there's now a vast array of research that supports the selective cytotoxicity of ascorbic acid against cancer cells. So we know that it is toxic towards cancer cells. And even though the mechanisms are unknown, we do know that there are some key factors that are determining these actions. However, like I said before, there seems to be one cancer already identified to be especially susceptible. So even though cancers are all cancers, they do have their differences. And according to current research, pancreatic adenocarcinoma is especially susceptible, and I'll be tapping into some of the possible reasons why this is. It's not definitive yet. And this is incredibly important because of how unsuccessful current treatments are for this type of cancer, for pancreatic adenocarcinoma. If you didn't already know what pancreatic adenocarcinoma is, it is the most common type of pancreatic cancer. So usually when someone says pancreatic cancer, they're most likely referring to this specific type, since it is 85% of the reported cases. Adenocarcinomas are named as such because they start in the area of the pancreas where the digestive enzymes are made. So some of the key symptoms of pancreatic adenocarcinoma are things like jaundice, so like the yellowing of the eyes, dark urine and light stool, unintended weight loss, pain after eating, nausea, back pain, and lower abdomen pain. Unfortunately, these symptoms don't pop up until it's far too late in the cancer's progress, which is why it's so hard to treat. Some of the treatment options for this cancer are dependent, again, on the stage. And because we don't catch it until it's far too late, usually surgery is the only treatment that's available. And even this isn't necessarily a curative treatment. Sometimes if there's no other option, they'll use surgery just to improve the quality of life, not because it's going to cure the cancer itself. There are adjuvant treatments, and when I say adjuvant, it means like a supplement treatment. Those include radiation and chemotherapy, but those do not significantly improve the long-term survival. So this is why vitamin C therapy would be really important for this particular type of cancer. Like I said, this has a very low prognosis, so only 25% of people survive in the first year, and only 5 live for 5 years. If it is diagnosed early, the prognosis doesn't really get much better. It only really goes up to 20%. So if I didn't already specify why this is so important when talking about pancreatic adenocarcinoma, there are other reasons why this research is vital for science and society. Should vitamin C show a considerable and usable ability to fight cancer, it could be applicable as a less aggressive alternative. So we all know that chemotherapy is very aggressive. It debilitates someone's quality of life. It sometimes gives new symptoms that weren't even present with the cancer. And because vitamin C is specifically cytotoxic to cancer cells, you wouldn't have these like overwhelming symptoms, and you wouldn't affect the quality of life of the patient nearly as much if you just use chemotherapeutic agents. Also, it shows applicable adjuvant abilities. So what I mean by that is research has shown that if you combine it with another type of cancer drug, it actually increases that drug's ability in the body, thereby reducing the toxicity because you don't have to use that chemotherapeutic drug nearly as much. And I'll talk about the specifics of that later on. Another big reason, if we all love to have enough cash in our wallets, so this is significantly less costly because it's something that's naturally occurring and no one has to like go out of their way to produce it. Lastly, it's well understood antioxidant effects, like I said, can supplement current therapies, thereby reducing chemotherapy's toll on the health and quality of life of the patient. So, what does the evidence tell us? It tells us a lot of things. Unfortunately, it doesn't reveal much about the mechanisms, but we're getting there. So, the scientific review of the overarching cancer is we found that ascorbate is better than DHA. And DHA is a form of vitamin C called dehydroascorbic acid. It's the oxidized form. So according to research, ascorbate is much better at being cytotoxic towards cancer, more so than DHA. So that's really useful information because then further studies can use this particular type of vitamin C form instead of using DHA and not muddling the studies and the results. We've also found that one of the key, I don't want to say mechanism, but the key thing that's happening that's leading to apoptosis of cancer cells, which means cell death, is H2O2 production, hydrogen peroxide. It's a critical mechanism of ascorbate action, but we don't know the mechanism, like exactly how H2O2 production is leading to cancer cell death. We have some ideas, but the exact mechanism is not pinned down. But I will talk about maybe a potential way that it's doing it in future slides. Ascorbate treatment produces anti-proliferative effects, like I've said before, on tumor cells, so long as the doses are pharmacological, which is what I said before, if they're high enough. At millimolar concentrations, it reduces cell viability and invasiveness significantly because they're not able to divide and they're not able, therefore, to continue being a cancer. And then I already said about the apoptosis thing. So it also, like I said before, shows beneficial adjuvant properties. So vitamin C showed stronger cytotoxicity against a chemotherapeutic drug called vemurafenib. I'm probably saying that wrong, but it's a commonly used cancer drug. And it was able to increase the cytotoxicity of that drug in a cell line. It was also, so that means that it's synergistic cytotoxicity with that drug. It means that it improves the ability for that drug to work, which means that you don't have to use as much of it in the body. So it won't be as toxic within the body. So it also showed that lower dosages of vitamin C given orally increased melanoma growth. So that's really important because if you give someone below the amount that's going to be cytotoxic, you might actually be helping their cancer grow. So that's why the pharmacokinetics of it is so important. So pancreatic cancer, specifically, what does the research tell us? So there are a lot of things that correlate with all other types of cancers, and current research has pinpointed a couple of specific things towards pancreatic adenocarcinoma. And one of them is that ascorbate suppresses hypoxia-inducible factor 1 alpha, which is a very long name, but basically it's a transcriptional regulator that functions in the adaptation of cells to hypoxic conditions, which means it helps the cancer cell lines survive in low oxygen environments, which strongly impacts the prognosis of patients with cancer. So this is something that's found a lot of times in really aggressive cancers. So it's been shown that ascorbic acid can suppress this, so thereby inhibiting the cancer line's ability to affect you nearly as aggressively. It also reduces radiation-induced toxicity and enhances tumor radiosensitization. And basically what that means is that it reduces the toxicity of radiation that is being used in order to kill the cancer. So you don't have as many negative symptoms. And it also enhances the tumor radiosensitization. So it enhances the radiation's ability to work on your body. So it's kind of like a 2-in-1, which is really great for patients. They've also found that it induces autophagy in pancreatic cancer. Autophagy, if you didn't know what it was, it's the self-digestion of cellular components through the generation of things called autophagosomes. But basically, it leads to cancer cell death, and that's really what we're talking about. So it's another form that it affects these cancer cell lines. So one of the things that some researchers wanted to know is, why is pancreatic adenocarcinoma, why does it seem like it's a little bit more susceptible to H2O2 production than other cancer cell lines? Well, they did some investigating and they found out that maybe it has something to do with something called peroxyporins, which basically are present in some of these pancreatic cell lines. So when they silence them in the pancreatic cell, the results showed that it significantly increased the surviving fraction compared to the wild type. So that maybe if we got rid of this, or if we targeted this, that would be a viable way to use it for clinical trials and then maybe future cancer therapies. So in depth, hydrogen peroxide, as I've probably said it a bunch of times before, is really important. So even though we don't know the mechanism of it yet, we do have some ideas as to how it might be working in or affecting these cancer cells that maybe might lead us to the mechanisms in the future. So yeah, the how is where it gets complicated. But there is some research that's going into the metabolics of it all. So they think that metabolic alterations in human cancer cells might be what's causing the oxidative stress that causes the cancer cells to die. So various studies have found that vitamin C treatment induced cytotoxicity by adenosine triphosphate, ATP. It's like a form of energy that your body uses. It's depletion of it in some cancer cells. So it's not allowing it to produce this very important energy. So they're not able to grow as much. So, and basically this is just, they wanted to know how ascorbic acid affected all of these very fancy sounding cycles. But really what they wanted to get at was, how does vitamin C affect the cancer cell metabolism of it? So what they found is really interesting. So the way that they did it, they found that when they introduced vitamin C in really high concentrations into these cells, it caused NAD depletion, which was obviously induced by this H2O2 generation. And they were able to confirm this by reintroducing the NAD. And when they reintroduced it, the cancer cell lines were able to proliferate again. So they know that it has something to do with this. So the relevance of the findings is that it shows that targeting cancer cell metabolism may be a prospective target for cancer therapy. So this might be like a specific way to go. ATP generation in cancer cells changes from oxidative phosphorylation to glycolysis, even under really low oxygen conditions. And what this means is, because cancer cells use glycolysis more than normal cells, then we may be able to like specifically target them so that we're not harming normal cell lines, kind of the way that chemotherapy does, where it just kind of kills everything. So glycolysis, like I said, could be a potential target for cancer therapy. And this is kind of, so the findings of it, even though it's still relatively new, the hypothesis is that vitamin C induced H2O2 may cause DNA damage, which would then lead to PARP activation, which would then lead to NAD consumption, which then eventually leads to the decrease in ATP. So that's the current hypothesis to like, how is this happening? So we may not have an exact mechanism, but we do have something to work off of to see if it's proven to be correct or not. But current research findings do support that hypothesis. So as an overview of everything that I've talked about, we've talked about the route of administration and the dosage. So we know that that matters. If we're going to do future studies, we have to recognize that how we administer these things and to what extent matters a lot about what results that we get from it. We also learned that hydrogen peroxide accumulation is the known main cause of cancer cell death, despite the fact that the mechanisms are still pretty much unclear. But there is there's some prospective findings in metabolic process alteration. And then we also learned that pancreatic cancer seems particularly susceptible, but even though we don't have a particular reason why, it may have something to do with peroxyporin expression, and that's something that we can further investigate in the future. So, like I said, the limitations are pretty clear. There's still no concrete evidence for any specific mechanisms in an in vivo setting, but we do have some ideas. Unfortunately, though, because we don't have an exact mechanism, our ability to design effective clinical trials is hindered by the lack of understanding of this. So we're not able to effectively influence the effective dose, timing of administration, and the probable responsive care models, which we talked about is really important. If you don't know what the outcomes might be, then you can't really set up a successful cancer therapy from it. Even though there are some successful case studies, you can't just base it off of a couple of occasions where it's worked. So, to conclude, this is really vital research. It matters a lot to a lot of different types of cancer patients, but especially to pancreatic adenocarcinoma patients. Because it's a really aggressive cancer, it can't be caught until it's much too late. And the treatment options that we have available simply aren't working. So they would really benefit from something like this should it be successful. There are obviously a lot of vast benefits, but the main ones is that it doesn't appear to be nearly as toxic as current chemotherapeutic treatments because it's specifically cytotoxic to the cancer. And it's also, because of that, a new, less debilitating therapeutic agent. Maybe not as many symptoms, and it wouldn't decrease the quality of life for the patient, which is critically important. However, I do want to preface that even though there are a lot of great things about vitamin C, it is not a cancer cure. So it does show to inhibit the cancer and like inhibits cell growth and division. It does show to be it boosts the ability for chemotherapeutic drugs to work, but it's not going to cure the cancer by any means. And the way that we've learned from the past is that we may find out that there are some side effects to using large amounts of vitamin C. There's no way to definitively tell right now, but that's a probable outcome that we should be aware of as we go forward in the future. Despite that, the future looks fruitful.
Thank you, Valeria. If you guys have any questions.
Hi, excuse my voice a little bit. This was very interesting and informative. I actually have a couple different questions. One, when vitamin C is taken orally, you kind of said 1.7 millimolar was this magic number of the concentration. So when you take it orally, what is the maximum concentration that you can get to?
I don't know the exact number,
Okay.
but you can't get to millimolar concentrations. So it's just because of the way that your digestive system works. So like your body doesn't want that accumulation. So you just simply won't get to it. And then the way that you're taking the vitamin C orally, it's not going to be distributed nearly as well throughout your body like you would in
So maybe 100 or
intravenously.
1,000 times
Yeah,
less.
it's just it wouldn't reach that concentration.
Okay. Part two, you said at the lower concentrations, it's actually proliferative rather than anti.
Yeah.
So is there any studies that have been done that why it has a negative action at the lower? I mean, you kind of focused very well on the positive aspects
Yeah.
of the higher. Have there been studies on the negative aspects of the lower?
So thankfully, currently, it doesn't affect the normal cells like it affects the cancer cells because of the fact that the cancer cells use glycolysis, and for whatever reason, it seems to be targeting that metabolic way that the cancer cells survive. And so it's specifically cytotoxic to them. So thus far, no, there's not been any horrible side effects to the normal cancer cell lines. And I think, did you ask that why?
Yeah, if there's been any studies of why at lower concentrations it's proliferative rather than anti-proliferative.
So they believe it's because vitamin C is an antioxidant, so it usually is very beneficial to your body. So if you're taking it at the normal concentrations and it's not getting to that cytotoxic point, it's helping the cancer cells just like it would your normal cells. So it's boosting them too. There's no discrimination.
Okay, my last question is kind of tongue-in-cheek and a bit hypothetical. If vitamin C was found to have all these wonderful effects at higher concentrations, is there any fear that its cost will just suddenly explode, right? Because one of the main advantages right now is, like you mentioned, it's so cheaper than chemotherapy, but the way drug companies often often act when they find something that is a gold star. I don't know if you read about that anywhere, if there was any fear about that. That's my last question.
Yeah, no, I actually wondered that while I was doing my research. I didn't find anything that specifically talked about it. What I would assume, this is purely hypothetical in terms of me answering your question, is they might charge you for the amount of effort that went into finding out whether vitamin C is a cure, and maybe that's how they'll get you, or maybe they'll name it something different.
Thank you.
Dr. Blumenthal?
A couple questions kind of feeding off Dr. Friedman here as well, but I take vitamin C. I take maybe 200 2,000 milligrams a day to try to fight off colds and things like that, and that's orally. So are you suggesting that I probably should not be doing that because while it's an antioxidant and it makes me fight off colds better, but maybe I'm stimulating cancer cells in my body?
Potentially.
If you already have cancer cells, it
Well,
just contributes to the growth.
except we all have cancer cells that we fight off, so.
I mean, that was something that, I wondered it when I was reading it, and it was a thing that they were like, oh, well, dang. So I would hope not. They didn't really they didn't really go into if you have cancer and you don't know it and you're taking vitamin C. They didn't really talk about that. I should hope not. Maybe it's because it's an antioxidant and getting rid of those free radicals.
I mean, there's got to be a plateau, how little and then how much.
Yeah.
So if it's below a certain level, it may not stimulate cancer.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's no way that we can get up to I don't know, even parenterally, how to inject that much vitamin C into somebody without their urine just being
Yeah.
vitamin C.
And they did find, that when they pumped people with like a bunch of vitamin C, their body did eventually get rid of it. It just took a lot longer for the body. It stayed in the tumor section for whatever reason. And they're thinking that maybe it has something to do with the lack of oxygen in that area. They're not sure. But like it would be gone from the body in about 8 hours using intravenous injection, but it would take 16 hours for it to leave the tumor area. So that was really interesting.
And I find it curious too that while vitamin C is an antioxidant, you said that it stimulated H2O2 production, which is kind of
I know.
backwards.
Yeah, it's backwards. So just because there's more of it for whatever reason, it's causing all of this damage. Yeah. Pharmacokinetics is very important.
It's a growing field.
Yeah. So watch how you take your drugs.
Okay, my question is based on what you're presenting in the research that they're looking at using the vitamin C therapy in conjunction with the chemotherapy more towards a curative type aspect, correct?
Well, the hope is curative, but probably not. It'll probably just boost the ability for that drug to work. So it reduces the amount of toxicity that that drug will produce in your body, and the vitamin C makes it even more cytotoxic towards the cancer. So it's not like an all-curing thing, but it's certainly better than what we have now.
So in your research, did you come across anything that they might be looking at it as more a palliation for end-of-life comfort? Because we all know pancreatic cancer, it's one of the more difficult disease processes to treat for pain and comfort in an individual. So did you see anything where they may be leaning towards that as vitamin C, or could it work in a palliative type situation?
That's a really interesting question because I did run into one research article that did use it in palliative care. Most of them were like using it to reduce symptoms in the patients, but they were able to reduce not the amount of pain, but at the very least the amount of negative symptoms that these dying patients were experiencing. So yes, it's a very small amount of research, but it's present. So yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
I have a question, actually. In the patients who came off chemotherapy and went on to vitamin C, by how much was that chemotherapy reduced, and did they find that they had to go back on chemotherapy?
So there weren't any. I found some case studies, so it wasn't like anything like a for real in-depth journal article sort of thing. But there were some people that said that when they came off of chemotherapy and went on to vitamin C, that they were cured. They weren't able to repeat that like in further studies. And then in terms of it does, if you use it together, it reduces the cytotoxicity, or not the cytotoxicity, the toxicity of that therapeutic agent in the body. But they haven't, because they're not taking those case studies seriously since they're not able to repeat them. I don't know if going from this to vitamin C, if it just gets rid of all of the side effects from the chemotherapy and cures your cancer. There isn't anything like that, but I mean, who knows? Maybe it'll be another controversy that'll spike some more research and it might prove to be true.
First, great job, Valeria, on your research. I'm just out of curiosity, why specifically did you pick pancreatic cancer?
So initially, it kept popping up in my research. Either there was a research article specifically looking at it, or when I would look at reviews, they would say this one seemed particularly susceptible for whatever reason, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So then I looked up pancreatic cancer, and it turned out to be a incredibly aggressive, untreatable cancer. And then I thought, and this, I don't know if the coincidence of life, when I don't know if you know that I'm taking a death and dying class, but in one of the documentaries that we watched, one of the women that was struggling with dying and receiving palliative care, she had pancreatic cancer. So I got to see how that affected the quality of life and how hard it was as she was dying to go through that. So that I decided, well, if I've seen how it affects a patient, and clearly the research is saying that it's susceptible, and the cancer is really awful, it would be really interesting to see where the research is going for it, to see if there's any hope for the future. So It's looking bright, hopefully.
One possible, if you want me to answer your question.
Yeah.
One possible mechanism for treating pancreatic cancer over solid cancers is that it's a very diffuse kind of cancer. So you can get more cells surrounded by higher levels of the drug easier with pancreatic cancer. And the other thing is pancreatic cancer kills primarily through metastasis. And if you have high levels of vitamin C, it may stop the migration of these cells to other sites as well. So, just supposition.
Thank you very much, Valeria.
Thank you.